welcome and thank you for having me. I looked at some of your webinars and who's up and coming, the previous ones and who's up and coming. I'm honored to be among such company.
Awesome. We are so excited to have you here. And, you know, we were doing a little bit of research kind of on your journey and how you've gotten to where you are. And I'd love to just kind of start with that because you just have so much that you've done from an author. You know, you started out, you got a degree in writing, and here we are on a podcast for leaders and hairdressers. So kind of walk us through your amazing journey, because you're also in a band. Like, there's just so many things about you.
Well, you know, it's funny because I consider myself to be an incredibly challenged individual, and any of the things that I did actually took a lot of work. But it's been and it continues to be a great life. I'm inspired by everything. I have turned my my head in the clouds and my ability to be distracted, you know, into being inspired ongoingly. And so, you know, the version that I'm a haircut. I'm a runway and editorial session stylist. I'm an independent educator. And before I became a hairdresser, you know, I loved writing, the spoken word, the written word, hairdressing, and women. Not necessarily in that order, but those are my passions. And when I began 47 years ago, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to be a hair cutter. So at 19 years old, I set out to find the best hair cutters I could find. I'm from New York, so it wasn't too difficult. But again, it was 1973, and I was just reminded by my friend Tony Beckerman that it was only 3 years earlier that he arrived to America to teach precision haircutting to us in New York, and I became a hairdresser 3 years later. So I did my apprenticeship at Sassoon in New York City on Fifth Avenue, and I'm the first person to have ever worked there twice. Back in 1976, while at Sassoon, I naively introduced the merits of dry movement cutting to the gods of precision haircutting, and that didn't go over very well, as you might imagine. So I quit in a huff, and I went off and began my career developing my own method of cutting hair, a wet and dry fusion. And then after slapping myself in the face, I said, oh my God, what did you do? And I went back and I got rehired at Sassoon, and I had a pretty good career over there. I did some memorable soirees. I wrote the original apprentice manual for Sassoon. And then I was fired for shaving my eyebrows as an expression of male grooming for the coming decade, the 80s. I then went underground, developed my clientele, really finalized my approach to cutting hair, which is called plain blending. And I wrote a book on hair cutting and standardized the language of hair cutting, because I found that we didn't have a common language to communicate effectively in education with one another. So I wrote the Haircutter's Handbook, and I worked for some of the top salons in New York. My two most favorite salons was Roger Thompson at Barney's, working with the legendary Roger Thompson. We shared the same room together, and Peppino Buccheri, which was the premier editorial salon in New York. And like I said, I was an editorial. I made my name as a hair cutter, a specialized hair cutter. I did editorial, which was cool. I didn't enter contests. I was too cool for contests. I do wish I had entered some contests, but I was too busy working for the magazines and working for the runway before there was 7-on-7 and all of that stuff. It was a little bit more low key. And my whole career, I've been a non-manufacturer independent educator. So here I am 47 years later, and I continue to have a great career, a great life. I love what I do. I'm primarily a keynote speaker now, and I teach both secrets of wet and dry haircutting and what I call mindset in action. I mentor participants, students, to break through their self-imposed limitations and challenges that they have associated with haircutting. So that's my career. There have been many, many highlights, but that's how I wound up being here on your webinar, which I'm honored to be a part of. So thank you again for having me.
Awesome. What a journey you've had, and you think back, like, what's one thing you wished you would have known before you've had your 40 plus years in this beautiful industry?
I think that I probably wouldn't have been so much of a lone ranger. To be independent from manufacturers, to not enter the world of contests, to not belong to any organizations until I belong to Intercoiffure. I don't belong to any of the other organizations. And regrettably, while I had mentors who taught me how to cut hair, I never had a mentor that put their arm around me and said, come with me, I'll introduce you to people. So I'll take care of you on your climb upward. So I think if I could have done one thing differently, I would have been a little less isolated, or as I like to say, arrogantly, a little less elite in my bubble. I might have taken Mary Brunetti's advice. Mary and I are each other's oldest friends. We went to cosmetology school together. And after she became the first woman to win NAHA as hairdresser of the year, when we were high-fiving, she said, David, you should really enter NAHA, you'll win. And I was like, Mary, I'm too busy, la, 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 la. And so I probably would have been a little bit more inclusive of others earlier in my career. It's something that I learned midway through and a little bit later in my career. So that's one thing.
I love that. Mentors are so important to, the success of everybody. And as you look at your life right now, who are some of those mentors that you have around you?
Well, before I talk about the ones I have around me now, I'd love to give a shout out to the ones I had who shared with me their secrets. And that would be Gary and Vito. Gary has passed away, but they were the first two. Then Nicholas Velarde and Lucian Cirillo, they really taught me how to cut hair even before I went to Sassoon. And then at Sassoon, it would have to be Alan Vernon Keach, Mary Lou Green, and of course, overall, giving me a great context for my work was Roger Thompson. Today, my mentors, or the people that I learn from, is much more vast. It's my peers who I'm constantly learning from because they're so talented and they did things that I didn't do, and I'm learning from them. But the place I learn the most is when I'm teaching and I work with people who are struggling to break through in their haircutting skills. And it's up to me to figure out how to get in with them so that they can have a breakthrough. So I have a lot of mentors and I'm thankful to them. Many of them are colleagues at Intercoiffure. I have a lot of colleagues on a new platform called salontraining.com, which is presenting live education in a virtual format. And so, I like to shout out Mary and Philip Wilson, James Alba, Oscar Valencia. Those are right on the tip of my tongue, current mentors. And I'm very thankful to have them as my friends and colleagues.
I love that. We've kind of talked about your journey over the past, 40 years. What would you say that you're most proud of?
My most proud of. I think perhaps the thing that I'm most proud of is sort of dual, a sort of maybe left brain, right brain kind of thing. I'm really proud of being thought of as well-spoken and literate and an out-of-the-box thinker. I've come up with a number of different concepts. Apart from being a pioneer back in the early 70s, as I said, of dry hair cutting, I've developed a number of dry hair cutting techniques that I'm very proud of. And I'm also proud of being known for my creativity, for my live stage presentations, and as well as my collections, my photo collections that I've put out. I very rarely do a collection of photos that's cropped and it's just the head and it's a haircut. It's usually a scene, an editorial type of scene where there's a story going on and it's saying something beyond only the hair. I don't want to say simply the hair or just the hair, because the hair is the most important fashion accessory. But my pictures are not about just the hair. So I'm proud about both of those things. My concepts that I'm known for, as well as my creativity.
I love that. And, you started the call talking about how, you're loving life and you're staying inspired. So what inspires you to, live that best life? What are some of your inspirations?
Well, I talk about being inspired by the everything. And what I mean by that is it's important to open yourself up and allow yourself to be inspired beyond the things that we would typically be inspired by: music, art, kids on the street, films, and allow yourself to be inspired by the spectrum. Vidal was inspired by architecture, by the Bauhaus, by a building. He was inspired by a building, by buildings, to create haircuts. And of course, he was inspired by the fashion of Mary Quant. I created a really cool haircut a number of years ago that was featured in Harper's Bazaar. It was called the Beat Cut. And what inspired me, I was walking along Broadway and I went past the Waverly bookstore, and they had a whole window of books by the beat poets and the beat writers. And I thought to myself, man, wouldn't it be cool to create a beat haircut inspired by beatniks? And so I did. I called it the Beat Cut. And so what was I inspired by? I was inspired by a window display about books. So I would encourage people to be open to being inspired by the everything, but not the least important being your client in the chair. Now, I almost always talk about women. You can apply this to men, but I developed a concept called being musified. And what it is to be musified is to have a conversation with the person in your chair in such a way that it elicits her to express what her sense of style and beauty is, such that you're listening in a way that you get her. And when you get her, you're out of the box. And now you know exactly what to cut on her, because it's being given by her. She becomes your muse and you are musified by her. And that's where the source of your creativity comes from. That's where the source of, you know, how to figure out, well, what will I cut on her? You now know because she's your muse, and you will now create something for her, which I call an individually created couture haircut. I prefer to call bespoke hair for male grooming, because we think of bespoke as tailored suits created for a man, and couture is one-off clothing for women. So it's being musified by the person in my chair that gives me my inspiration, and I create a couture haircut especially for her.
I love that. So that kind of ties into, you know, as I was doing some research on you, there was something about consultation fundamentals.
Yes.
So kind of talk about that, because I think sometimes in this industry we just get into the hustle and bustle and everything just becomes so routine. Oh, you're getting the same cut, same color, okay, you know. So I love that you talked about, you know, having them be your muse. So kind of talk about consultation fundamentals.
Sure. I developed back in the 80s a 10-step consultation fundamentals. And there are some key elements. Introducing yourself, obviously, welcoming them before they get shampooed, before they get changed. And I think it's important to be consistent, to do the same thing every time, because there's something that I spoke about at 2 conferences that I call the law of diminishing returns. And that's when perceived value drops based on what you're paying. So the price stays the same, but the perceived value by the customer, client, or guest diminishes. So to offset that, the first thing you want to do is always be consistent. And, oh, that's ABC, always be consistent. I love that. I'm sure I'm not the first to say that in this context. But so I always see my client in my chair, even if it's brief, while she's in her street clothing, and I stand in front of her and I talk to her. You know, I was very fortunate that when I started my career 47 years ago at 19, at 21, I did my first personal growth program, and I began seeing things that I wouldn't normally have thought about. And I'll never forget the first time at Sassoon, I stood in front of the client and I didn't talk to her in the mirror while I was touching her hair. I stood around in front of her and I had a conversation with her. And I asked her, what's important to her? Length, how you look. What would you, if I did this, you would kill me, or if I don't do this, you would kill me. What's important to you? And then zip it up and listen. Listen, listen, listen. Now, you might have some questions to ask her. That's okay. You want to elicit information so you can get her. But I can't stress enough that after listening to her, you want to listen to yourself and how many times you put no in the conversation. And it doesn't necessarily mean saying the words no. It may be, well, you know, your face is too long, your face is too wide, your hair is too thin, your hair is too frizzy. Those are all negatories. They are no. We tell a client no a lot. And well, you never had my layers. And I think that that's something as important is to eradicate no from the conversation. So you want to elicit something from her You want to listen to her, ask questions, and be as lacking of technical. You don't want to give them our knowledge. I think it's a mistake to speak in terms of technique. As a colorist, I almost think it's a mistake to speak in terms of levels. We teach clients too much of what we're supposed to be experts in. It's not their business to know how I'm going to layer their hair, that's for us. So I think it's important to speak in terms of beauty and what you have beautiful eyes. So what I'm going to do is bring out your eyes. When she asks me how I'm going to do that, I'm going to say really well. I'm going to do it really well. But are you going to layer my hair? See, that's a loaded question. So when she says, are you going to layer my hair? I mean, seriously, there's a million ways to layer hair. So what is it that is we're asking questions? What is it you mean by layering? Then she will tell you what she doesn't like and what she does like. And then when she tells you, I'll say, well, yes, I'm not going to do any of those things. Well, what are you going to do? Cut your hair really well. Now let's go back and get shampooed and conditioned. And if she presses me, yeah, but I need to know what you're going to do. I tell her, what we discussed, and whatever it is we discussed, I tell her, I'm going to cut your hair to about here. I'm going to make it so it's sexy. I'm going to give you volume, but I'm not going to give you layers, the kind that you don't like. And then if she really, really, really presses me, I invite her to go to cosmetology school, get a license, and then I will teach her how to cut hair. And it really never gets to that place. If you're confident in what you do and you have the courage to stand for what you know to be true from her point of view, that's where the listening comes in. You can really make a big difference with the people in your chair. And then just to bring it to the end of the 10 steps, it ends with utilizing the decisive moments. A decisive moment is when she's looking in the mirror and she's in love with you. I love my hair. This is the haircut I always wanted, but I didn't know how to ask for it. And it's in that moment that you want to invite them to use any of the products that you might have used on her hair. And you might want to invite her at that time to rebook her next appointment so that she's not behind the 8 ball when she wants to get in with you. And then finally, walk her to the desk, say goodbye, and recognize that the whole time, from beginning to end, is a consultation. It's all a consultation. It doesn't ever stop. And it's equally as important to learn that technique as it is any other technical skill that you have in your skill set.
That's awesome. You mentioned when you were 21 that you got into a personal growth program. And, we think it's so important to continually, pour into yourself and continue to grow and continue to be on that journey. So what are you currently learning and growing? What does that look like for you now?
Well, I'm not currently in any formal programs. And I not only immersed myself in the study and practices of a couple of different methodologies, both formal training and metaphysical training, but I also led seminars for many years to thousands of people on the topics of relationship, communication, health and well-being, different topics like that that had nothing to do with hair. But I will give a shout out, to my friend and colleague, Oscar Valencia. Oscar has developed these bricks and breaking down your walls. And so he bought my book and he said, you want to buy my bricks? And I said, sure. And they're really cool. So I use Oscar's bricks to remind me of what my purpose is today and ongoingly. And I have coaches. You know, I have coaches that I rely on to coach me to break out of my own limitations because I am a pretty challenged mofo.
I love that. I love that you talked about mindset as well. I think, you know, especially coming on the other side of the pandemic, I think that mindset is so important in the words that we tell ourselves. And, you know, what advice would you give to, you know, really focus on that mindset?
Well, I think it's important in learning to practice what I call synergistic learning and mentoring. And it's a harmonious conversation that intertwines style and technical skill set, language and theory set, and inspiration and growth mindset. Your technical skill set is how you do what you do. Your theory set is why, understanding why you're doing it. And your mind is, who are you being? What is your attitude in it? And I think when you have all three of those working together, it's important for one's larger growth potential. And I am probably one of the few people who particularly don't practice asking the question, what is my why? I don't care why you're doing what you're doing. Pick a reason, any reason, it will do. I think a more important question is what? What is my what? What is important to me? What is my vision? What is my mission? What is my purpose? What are the things I need to delegate and to whom? I think that's a powerful question. Oftentimes when I hear people talk about, you know, their why, and you know, far be it from me to, I'm not putting it down, I'm simply saying I don't practice it. People will say, well, here's my why. And then they give you a list of reasons, and it's often followed with justifications. And so maybe they're not in the study deeply of that, I don't know. But I think what is a powerful question. And what am I going to do today? You know, what actions could I take that if I took them, I would accomplish my purpose today? So, you know, what's my inspiring future? So I find what to be a powerful question. And, you know, mindset is everything from your inspiration, your inspirational mindset, that which is giving you passion, that which you find yourself inspired and passionate about, and growth mindset, which is doing the work. I think people mistake mindset for positive thinking. Mindset, it's positive thinking. Nothing wrong with positive thinking, nothing wrong with affirmations, you know, but mindset in action is doing the work necessary to overcome the challenges that you have. And as you overcome those challenges, again, it's all synergistic. You develop courage, you develop confidence, you accomplish your goals and your vision. I hope that answered your question.
Perfectly.
And I've been practicing this for a number of years. You know, a lot of people are on the mindset bandwagon, but I've been, and good, but I've been practicing mindset for 40 some odd years in various forms. And over the last 6 or 7 years, I focused it to specifically the craft of haircutting and overcoming challenges. And much like the Haircutter's Handbook, I started writing a paper on the value of neuroeducational learning principles. You know, it's about rewiring our brain. And one of the best ways to rewire our brain is in overcoming bad habits, one habit at a time, one day at a time, over time, if that makes sense.
So good. Oh my gosh, this interview is incredible. I wish it could go all day because I want to dig into your mindset because you think so differently. And that's why we were so excited to be able to interview you. So first of all, thank you so much for doing this. But I would love for you to share the Haircutter's Handbook and why people need to get that. What's inside there that's different than any other haircutting book out there?
Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me again. I'm loving your questions. They're great. And the Haircutter's Handbook. Here it is. The Haircutter's Handbook came out in 1986. I wrote the first section of it, the original apprentice manual, before any other section. And as I said, I wrote it while I was at Sassoon. So the original Haircutter's Handbook had 3 sections. It had the standard language of haircutting, which was to my knowledge, the first compilation ever of the modern techniques of haircutting in one compilation, in one book. The second section was a suggested curriculum for people who would like to have an apprentice program, an in-salon training program, but didn't necessarily know where to begin. And the third section was the apprentice manual. 86, it came out, and then 10 years later, it had its first major revision, and I added 3 articles that were published. One was on what is a job, which has to do with service, the value of continuing education, and the third article was my approach to haircutting called plain blending that appeared in a magazine. So I reprinted those articles in the Haircutter's Handbook. For this edition, which is the 33 1/3 anniversary edition, I revised the whole entire book. I added a collection of curated photographs for the first time. I redid all of the diagrams. It's fully illustrated with diagrams on all the techniques. I added additional terminology. And then I added some of the other newer writing that I had done that no one had seen unless they'd been in a class with me. My writings about dry haircutting, my writing about the physics of hair. I coined an expression called physical hair, the theory of hair relativity, where I suggest, where I theorize that haircutting is not based on geometry, as is widely thought. It's based on physics, which includes geometry. It's not as if we overlook geometry. It's that geometry is just not the whole picture. It's not a shape. It's connecting shapes that are relative to one another and to a person's features and her lifestyle and her everything. And it's not just relativity, it's quantum. So the Haircutter's Handbook has all of that in it. It's pretty cool. It was laid out so that it's kind of like a bookazine. It reads really well. It's not meant to be read as a novel. It's more of a reference book. And I think that if you're a novice, just beginning in your career, the value in it is understanding why you're doing what you're doing. For those of you out there who are educators, I think it's valuable as an educational tool. It gives you a certain backup. You know, salon owners often say when they bring in a coach, I really thank you for coming in. You said things that they just don't hear from me. So it's a good tool book to back you up. And if you're an owner of a salon, it gives, and you have apprentices, it gives them a manual to train them. So management, it's useful. Educators, If you're a stylist, it will validate things that you know. It will open up avenues of thinking that you might not have thought before. And if you're new, it will help you with laying a strong foundation for your future. I'm really proud of the fact that this particular edition, in addition to the preface by Vidal Sassoon that he gave me many years ago, and quotes from some of my colleagues back then, for this edition, I've got a commentary from some of the greatest leaders and legends and icons in our industry: Stephen Moody, Dwight Miller, Van Council, Mary Brunetti, as I said, Charlie Price, perhaps at this moment, just perhaps the single most creative hairdresser I can think of. I mean, he's brilliant, and he was generous, and there's so many others. Maurice Tidy, who, I mean, he was Vidal Sassoon's first apprentice, and he invented the graduated bob. That's like Bob Dylan needed to not write anything else after Blowing in the Wind, and he was cool. If Maurice Tidy did nothing else after the graduated bob, he would have accomplished more than anyone's ever accomplished. So I'm really honored that those people have contributed to me and to the book. So it's a book that no matter what level you're at, you'll find it useful.
I love it. And how can people get a hold of it? Get a hold of this book?
Well, currently, and that's changing, it's available at Amazon.com.
Okay.
You can get a copy of the book, The Haircutter's Handbook, and it'll come right up. People can contact me, DM me, and I'm happy to send them a signed copy, personalized to them, as well as cosmetology schools can get beauty school discounts, and salon owners can get wholesale team discounts. But it's also being offered at salontraining.com in their merchandise store. And it will be offered at a couple of other sites, from Stephen Adams' site. I believe he's out of Minneapolis. It will be available very soon. And it will be available at my good friend, Nick Berardi's, nickeducation.com. That's all that comes to the top of my head. So I know it will be available in a few more places very, very soon.
Oh,
but right now, Amazon.
So good. I think so many people are really struggling with systems, and you kind of hit on that a little bit earlier. And I want to dig a little deeper as we start to close this out. Like I said, I wish this could be a whole 8-hour segment because you have so much information. But earlier, it was interesting because you were closing your eyes and you were talking, and it was so beautiful because I started to think, as a salon owner, as a salon leader, if we could immerse ourselves, like you're immersing yourself, like you immersed yourself in this conversation because you took us back to that moment. And you know, it's so interesting because Sean and I, we have a 6-month course that we train salon owners and salon leaders, so the salon directors of the salons, and we take them through this entire course of foundation, which is what you were talking about, systems, right? So foundations, if that's broken, everything else is going to fall apart. Leadership, communication, attitude, hiring. And so the interesting part was you were talking about communication, but instead of the word communication, you use the word listening. And that was so powerful. And I want to dig into that because I think for myself, for my leaders, for the coaches that we, work with, as well as the salon owners, is that's the challenge. Their eyes are too open. They're not closing their eyes. They're not listening to their people. Of, like you said, with your guest, of where your guest is at. And I believe we're not listening to our stylists, and they're crying out to us, but we don't hear them. We don't hear our team members of what they're saying to us. Can you talk more about that and help us to get immersed in that? Sure. You know, when we talk about listening, it's important to recognize that we're talking about, what are we listening to? Well, we're listening to a conversation, right? But to think that there's a conversation going on like this is to be naively misinformed. There's a lot of conversations going on all at once. There's the one I'm having with myself in my head. Yeah.
There's the one that's coming out of my mouth that I think I'm saying, and I'm hoping matches the one in my head, but I don't necessarily know because I'm not listening to this one, and I'm not necessarily listening to this one. There's the conversation that it's landing over with the person. Like, for instance, I'm talking to you right now, and there's the conversation that you're having with yourself. And there's a lot of conversations going on. If you're having a meeting, there's exponential conversations going on. So I think that if you want to train yourself in the skill of listening, it's important to recognize the conversation you're having with yourself in your head, because that will begin to get you in touch with your humanity and your fears and your challenges, because they're having them as well, whether it's a client or your team. So listening is more than just talking and hearing the other person. So, you know, when I close my eyes, that's to get me out of my head and out of my box and allow me to be with what's going on. And I'm not being distracted by even you at that moment. And I'm getting in touch with my out of the box thinking. You know, I don't want to get too much into it, but I practice getting out of my comfort zone. You know, we all talk about getting out of our comfort zone, but I've yet to meet somebody who can get out of their comfort zone at will, especially when they're attempting to handle a problem that needs out of the box thinking. It's not that easy to get out of your comfort zone right now, get out of it. So here's where my comfort zone is, it's here. So if I can be with myself, if I can be with the uncertainty, if I can be with the fear, if I can get to know my humanity, I can know others. And so therein lies some perhaps not so common tips on listening, as it were.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You know, again, I think all of these topics that I was telling you about that Sean and I do, they intermingle with each other, and you never graduate from any of them. So you have to, like you were saying earlier, synergistic. It's like a constant, you're going around and round and round. And okay, so I'm focused here. Like, how can I grow in this area right now? And I love that you said, get to know my humanity. That was huge, because, you know, going from listening, it kind of really corresponds with attitude too. And so if my emotions are high, like, what's causing my emotions to get high right now while they're talking? You know, am I offended? Am I trying to defend myself? Like, what's really going on? How do you stop yourself right then and there from reacting?
This is a topic that I could talk on for a very long time. Reacting is a visceral, physical response. It exists somewhere in your body. It comes along with thoughts, postures, attitudes, behaviors. That's your box. One wants to get in touch with those things and learn to be with them rather than hope for the time they go away. One of my favorite examples, I'm a performer, I'm a singer-songwriter, and I have told you a couple of times I'm an incredibly challenged individual. I could go down a list of my challenges, and not the least of which is stage fright. And we can call that fear, because most of our challenges and reactions are fear-based. And I'm reminded of when another singer-songwriter said to Bruce Springsteen, "Can you tell me what you do to get rid of those butterflies in your stomach and the tightness in your chest and the thoughts in your head that stop me from going on stage and performing?" Because, you know, we're all waiting for that fear to go away. As you even said, how do you get it to go away? I don't know if you'll ever get it to go away, but as Bruce Springsteen said, when I get those feelings in my stomach, when I get that tightness in my chest, and the voice in my head starts telling me, "I sure hope they like me tonight," he says, that's when I know it's time to go on. And he goes on with that, rather than waiting for it to go away. Simply said, if you want to get on the back of a motorcycle and you're afraid to get on and you're waiting for the fear to go away, it's not going to. Get on the bike with the fear. Because the fear, listen, I still have stage fright right before I go on. How long does it last? Not very long anymore. But I still have fear associated with performing. And so if you're waiting for those challenges to go away, you're going to lose precious time in accomplishing the goals that you have in your life.
Yeah, so good. So earlier you kind of went back. I want to go back to what you were saying. You said something that you wish you wouldn't have done was isolated yourself. And, you know, it's interesting. And I would love for you to comment on this. Like, what do you think is the greatest lesson salon owners and leaders are learning after 2020? And also, what do you think is the shift in our industry of people wanting to be lone rangers, if you will, of wanting to be able to work in their own salon suites? Because Sean and I also, we run 4 schools, 4 Paul Mitchell schools. And Sean will attest to this. When we meet brand new students, we'll say, how many of you want to own your own business? And it's pretty much every hand goes up now. You know, I remember 25 years ago when I first got into this, David, no hands went up, you know, because no one really saw themselves as being an entrepreneur or an owner. But now it's such that, and I'll go around the room and most of them are pretty much saying that they want to own their own salon suite, right? Not a salon. They don't want to manage people. They want to just have their own salon suite. And so it's almost like this big cyclical, you know, nature that's happening. So what do you think is happening here? And what's your opinion on that as well? Can you unmute him, Sean?
Yeah, you know what happened? I lost the whole entire connection for about 5 seconds.
Wow.
Like you were gone, and I was like, oh my God.
Oh, where'd he go?
Popped back up. I think before COVID happened, our industry began having a big paradigm shift between in the relationship between the employer and the employee. I know I'm going to see if I can't use the word owner because people have lost the meaning of that. They take offense to it. Well, you can't own me.
Yeah. That's good.
The employer never owned you. They owned a business, and that's why they're called the owner. But pre-COVID, we began to, I mean, at Intercoiffure, we had a lot of classes on opening yourselves up to listening to younger people.
Yeah.
Often referred to as millennials, but I never referred to them as that. They were just young people, like any other group of young people. They were being young. And, you know, back in my day, we were young in our way. growing our hair long, piercing our ear. Today, they're young in a different way. And if you don't recognize that they're just being young people doing what young people do, then you've gotten old. If the music's too loud, you're old.
Yeah.
So we began with it then. Now with COVID and with suites opening up, I think our industry is in a big, I'll say the word turmoil, but not turmoil meaning bad. It's being reevaluated. Every aspect of it is being reevaluated. And I don't know where it will all settle, whatever it is that said, the dust will settle. I was mixing metaphors in my head, the smoke and the fire and the dust. I don't know. I don't know where we'll all wind up when the dust settles, but I don't think it's bad that we're reevaluating what's important in our industry. I think right now people are all over the place, just the same way as when precision haircutting was being introduced back in America in the early 70s, and people were becoming departmentalized. Instead of being beauticians and operators, we were being hair cutters and colorists. And then generalists came out, and manufacturers came in. All of that is being reevaluated. I think what's important is that one of my coaches, I'm not taking credit for this, but I support him in this. I think it's important that whichever way everybody decides to go, and this pendulum swings this way, and then it swings this way, and then it settles in the middle. And right now we're in an extreme situation and a lot of uncertainty. It's a lot of unknowns, but I think one of the things that would be useful for our industry is for us to develop a code of ethics, an industry code of ethics. Lawyers, doctors, the business world, teachers, religions, the Society of Professional Journalists, the Specialty Food Association. They have a code of ethics, and I'm not aware that our industry has one, and I think it would benefit us. So Lonnie McLaughlin, a salon owner in, I believe it's Philadelphia, but I know it's in Pennsylvania. That's something he's championing for, and I support that. The other thing I think our industry needs is something COVID has shown us, is that we need some kind of industry representation, like other industries, like the restaurant world. There was big missed opportunities because we don't have a singular voice standing for us. So we had a missed opportunity to represent our industry, to transform how we are thought of. Missed opportunity to be deemed essential. I mean, we're licensed.
Yeah.
Licensed. Restaurateurs are not licensed, and I don't care who this offends. We know as well as anybody else, hair salons do not produce vermin. Restaurants produce vermin. And that is because they are unsanitary, because I'm sorry, it's not cool. And restaurants are up here in the government, how they're thought of, and hairdressers, we're just frivolous and whatever we're thought of. And we have licenses, and we're OSHA regulated, we're state regulated. So I do think that it's important that, beauty schools, all the different State Department of Cosmetology, major organizations like Intercoiffure, NAHA, Cosmopop, ABS, Premier, IBS, and the manufacturers get together to speak on, have a board that speaks on our behalf like a lobby group and represents us. And I think that apprenticing should be a part of our state licensure. I do not think we should be deregulated. I do not think cosmetology schools should be eradicated. I have high regard for cosmetology schools and for cosmetology schools instructors. And I think they would be supported if we had apprenticing being recognized. See, we're a trade before we're a craft or a profession. We're in New York, we're under the same heading as plumbers and steam fitters, and they all have apprentices recognized. And I think it would behoove us for those kinds of things to be a part of our industry, like bam, somebody, you know, some bodies are championing us for that.
Yeah, that's so good. And I agree. I think 2020 was that wake up call for people to kind of wake up and say, okay, I got to move, you know, I got to be a creative part of the solutions, which David, that's what you are. So thank you so much for doing this. What last piece of advice do you want to give salon leaders, employers right now as we finish out this podcast?
Salon leaders and salon owners. Well, stay true to yourself and your vision. Be flexible. Be flexible. Open yourself up to listen to the contribution that many people can make, you know, the younger hairdressers, your employees, and others, but be true to yourself and your vision. And both for the younger hairdressers and the salon owners, provide the best possible, provide the best possible education you can, and seek out the best possible education you can. And there's a lot of right now people have been home, and there's a lot of very good education online, but the rank and file hairdresser may not be as able to spot the good education from the not so good education. Not all education is good. You can learn bad things too. You can learn bad habits. So seek out the best education you can and be true to yourself and true to your vision. Be an original and think beautiful thoughts.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So David, and where can people find you on social media? What's the best platform for you?
The best platform for me is the Haircutters Handbook group on Facebook.
Okay.
We began 1 year ago, right before lockdown, with 99 members. And I came home from my last on-the-road class the week of lockdown, which was March 14th through 16th. We're now pushing on 5,000 members. That happened in a year. That's where people can find me. And if they would like to take online classes with me and a myriad of others, they can find me .com. And I'm also booking classes on the road now. I must say, I'm vaccinated, and people are starting to book my Secrets of Wet and Dry Haircutting classes in the conversation with David Kinigson.
I love that. And so you said haircuttershandbook.com.
No, well, that's not live yet.
Okay.
That isn't live yet. That's back when you asked me where they can buy the book. The Haircutters Handbook group on Facebook is the best platform to find me, apart from salontraining.com.
Awesome. And Lisa Hauser said, David's book made such a difference for my apprentices. Thank you, Lisa, for that shout out for David. So we appreciate
Lisa.
So much. You're amazing. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining live today too. Bye everyone.
You guys, Tina,
thank
Sean,
you, David.
Thank you so much. And thanks the audience. Thank you, the audience out there.
Bye-bye.
It's a great hour.
Thank you again.